What if a single moment of observation could shatter a life of hardship? For 24-year-old Ilara Vance, life was a relentless cycle of exhaustion, a long walk home in shoes so worn they barely held together. For billionaire Julian Croft, life was a fortress of glass and steel insulated from the world by a fortune built on logic and loss. He saw everything but felt nothing. Until one rainy night, through the tinted window of his Rolls-Royce, he saw her. He saw the impossible resilience in her posture and the heartbreaking story told by her torn shoes. He made a simple decision, a quiet gesture. But he had no idea that this single act of kindness would unleash a storm of consequences, unearthing secrets from his past and threatening to destroy the very woman he sought to help. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a pair of shoes became the key to unlocking a second chance, and the battle that had to be fought for it. The scent of truffle oil and seared scallops clung to Ilara Vance's uniform like a ghost of a world she could only serve, never join. It was 11:47 p.m. The last of the dessert plates had been cleared from Table 7, a boisterous group of finance bros celebrating a deal, their laughter echoing the clink of wine glasses that cost more than her week's rent. Ilara had smiled through it all, her feet screaming a silent protest from within the thin, battered confines of her black flats. As she pushed through the heavy oak door of the Gilded Sparrow, the city's most exclusive restaurant, a cold, relentless September rain immediately soaked through her thin jacket. The warm, golden light of the restaurant was snatched away, replaced by the slick, black asphalt, reflecting the indifferent neon signs of downtown Chicago. She pulled her hood up a flimsy defense against the downpour and began her nightly 42-block walk home. The bus was a luxury. The $3.50 for a one-way fare was a constant calculation in her head. It was half a loaf of bread, a bottle of children's Tylenol for her brother, or a small contribution to the ever-growing mountain of medical bills that sat on their small kitchen table. Tonight, like most nights, the walk won. Each step was a negotiation. The left shoe, a relic from a thrift store 2 years ago, had a persistent tear along the outer seam. With every footfall, a small, icy trickle of rainwater would seep in, soaking her sock. She had tried to fix it with superglue, then duct tape, but the city's unforgiving pavement had worn through her efforts. Now she simply endured it. She walked with a slight, almost imperceptible limp, favoring the drier right foot. This walk was her time to decompress, to shed the forced pleasantries of Ilara the attentive waitress, and become just Ilara, the girl who once sketched charcoal portraits with startling talent, who had an acceptance letter to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago tucked away in a memory box. The girl whose life had irrevocably fractured 6 years ago when a drunk driver had stolen her parents and left her the sole guardian of her then 12-year-old brother, Leo. Leo. He was the reason for the walk, for the double shifts, for the aching feet, and the constant gnawing fatigue. Leo had been born with cystic fibrosis, a cruel genetic thief that stole breath and vitality. His treatments were a financial black hole, swallowing every dollar she earned and more. But his smile, his quick wit, and the fierce protective love he had for her, that was the fuel that kept her moving. Tonight the weight was heavier than usual. A letter from the insurance company had arrived. They were denying coverage for a new experimental medication that his Dr. Anne Levine believed could significantly improve his lung function. Not deemed medically necessary at this stage, the sterile corporate language had read. It felt like a death sentence delivered by a clerk in a cubicle. The rain plastered her hair to her face. A car sped through a puddle, sending a tidal wave of grimy water splashing up to her knees. She didn't flinch, just clenched her jaw and kept walking. Past glowing storefronts, showcasing lives she couldn't comprehend, past warm-lit apartments where families were likely settling in for the night. She was a ghost in her own city, visible only to the streetlights. Her apartment was in a run-down 3-story brownstone in a neighborhood that the city was slowly forgetting. The lock on the main door was broken, and the hallway smelled perpetually of damp and cabbage. She climbed the 2 flights of stairs, her legs burning, and quietly let herself into the small 1-bedroom apartment she shared with Leo. The main room served as a living room, dining room, and Leo's bedroom. He was asleep on the pull-out couch, his breathing a faint, wheezing whistle that was the soundtrack to her fears. A nebulizer sat on the end table next to a stack of well-worn fantasy novels. Even in sleep, his face seemed pale, the dark circles under his eyes, a stark reminder of his daily battle. She tiptoed past him, into the tiny galley kitchen. The offending insurance letter was still on the table. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the cruel words. Despair, cold and sharp, pricked at her. For a moment, she allowed herself to sag against the counter, the sheer impossibility of it all crashing down on her. How much longer could she do this? How could she keep fighting a system so vast and impersonal? She took a deep, shuddering breath, pushing the feeling down. Despair was another luxury she couldn't afford. She had to be strong for Leo. She looked back at her sleeping brother, his chest rising and falling with effort. He was her whole world. She slipped off her soaked shoes, her feet numb and wrinkled. She placed the left one carefully on a newspaper, the torn seam gaping like a wound. She'd have to try the superglue again in the morning. She wrung out her socks in the sink, her reflection in the darkened window, a pale, weary stranger. She saw the exhaustion etched on her own face, but beneath it a flicker of defiance. They could deny her claims, they could drench her in rain, but they couldn't make her give up. Not as long as Leo was still breathing. She would find a way. She always had to. While Ilara negotiated the flooded Chicago sidewalks, Julian Croft sat in the silent, climate-controlled sanctuary of his Rolls-Royce Phantom. The car moved through the city like a ship on a calm sea. The chaos of the storm outside reduced to a mesmerizing, silent ballet of water droplets on the tinted windows. He wasn't going home. His sprawling, empty penthouse felt more like a museum of a life once lived than a home. He was simply driving a nightly ritual his driver, Thomas, had long stopped questioning. Julian was the architect of Croft Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm, renowned for its aggressive, almost prescient acquisitions. In the boardroom, he was a legend, a man who could dissect a balance sheet in seconds, whose cold grey eyes could make seasoned CEOs tremble. He saw the world in numbers, patterns, and efficiencies. He had mastered the art of calculated risk, but had long since forgotten how to navigate the unquantifiable terrain of human emotion. His wife Isabel had been the one who understood that world. She had been the colour to his monochrome, the laughter that filled the sterile spaces of his life. 4 years ago, a sudden aggressive form of pancreatic cancer had taken her from him in less than 6 months. His fortune, vast enough to move mountains, had been utterly useless against the rebellion of human cells. Since then, Julian had buried himself in the only thing he could control, his work. The fortress of wealth he had built became his prison. Tonight he was returning from a dinner meeting where he'd finalized the hostile takeover of a rival tech company. He had been ruthless, brilliant. He had won. But the victory felt as hollow as everything else. He stared out the window, his gaze unfocused, seeing not the city, but the ghost of Isabel's smile. That's when he saw her. She was just a figure at first, a woman walking alone in the deluge. but something about her posture caught his eye. It wasn't slumped in defeat. It was straight defiant, as if she were marching into battle, not just walking home. His gaze sharpened. The car was gliding to a stop at a red light, and she was right there on the corner, illuminated by the unforgiving glare of a street lamp. He saw her face, young, weary, but etched with a profound determination. He saw her thin jacket soaked through, and then he saw her shoes. The left one was visibly torn, the dark, wet sock peeking through. He watched as she subconsciously shifted her weight, a tiny protective gesture that spoke volumes of a long-acquainted hardship. In that moment, she wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was a data point that didn't fit his models. People in her apparent situation were supposed to look broken. They were supposed to radiate despair. She radiated resolve. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, a jolt of genuine, unbidden curiosity. It was followed by a pang of something else, a ghost of a memory Isabel years ago, when they were young and struggling, insisting on walking miles to save on bus fare, her own cheap shoes held together with a prayer. The light turned green. As the Rolls-Royce began to pull away, he made a decision. It was impulsive, illogical, a deviation from the calculated precision that defined his existence. "Thomas," he said, his voice startling in the silence. "Follow her." His longtime driver and head of security glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his expression professionally neutral, but Julian could see the surprise in his eyes. "Sir, at a distance. I want to know where she lives." "Be discreet." Thomas nodded expertly, maneuvering the large vehicle to keep the lone walking figure in sight without being conspicuous. For the next 20 minutes, Julian watched in silence as Ilara continued her relentless march through the rain-swept streets. He saw her pass bus stops without a second glance. He saw her ignore the taunts of a group of drunk men under an awning. He saw her continue step after agonizing step. Finally, she turned into the dilapidated brownstone. Thomas pulled the car over a block away, killing the engine. "Wait here," Julian commanded. He watched as a light came on in a second-floor window. For 15 minutes, he sat there in the opulent leather seat, the rain drumming a soft rhythm on the roof, staring at that single square of light in the darkness. He was trying to understand the feeling coiling in his chest. It wasn't pity. Pity was a useless, condescending emotion. It was recognition. A recognition of a strength he once valued above all else, a strength he felt he had lost when Isabel died. He finally broke the silence. "Thomas, I need you to get me a name. The woman who just went into that building. Second floor." "Of course, Mr. Croft. And find out everything you can about her. Her job, her family situation, any outstanding debts. I want a full confidential report on my desk by 7 a.m. "Understood, sir." Julian's gaze lingered on the window. "And Thomas, contact Stefano Berruti in Milan, the shoemaker. Tell him I need a pair of his finest women's walking shoes. Black calfskin leather. Size 7. Have them on the first flight to Chicago in the morning. No exceptions." Thomas raised an eyebrow, a rare show of surprise. Berruti shoes started at $5,000 a pair. They were handcrafted for royalty and the wives of oligarchs. "A size 7, sir." "Yes." Julian said, his eyes still fixed on the window. He was making an assumption on the shoe size, a calculated guess. "And one more thing. I want you to look into a Dr. Anne Levine at Chicago General Hospital, a specialist in pediatric pulmonology. Find out what her most pressing research or clinical needs are, specifically anything related to cystic fibrosis." With that, he leaned back, the first spark of genuine purpose he'd felt in years cutting through the fog of his grief. He didn't know this woman's name yet, and he had no idea what he was truly setting in motion. For the first time since Isabel's death, Julian Croft was acting not on logic or profit, but on an instinct he thought had died with her. He was about to intervene in a life, armed with the immense power of his wealth, completely unaware that this single act would force him to confront the ghosts he had so carefully locked away. The morning light was grey and grudging, filtering through the grimy window of the apartment. Elara woke with a familiar ache in her back from the lumpy mattress on the floor of her tiny closet-like bedroom. The first thought, as always, was Leo. She listened for a moment, hearing the soft puff of his nebulizer treatment from the other room, a sound that was both a comfort and a curse. It meant he was awake and breathing, but it also meant the disease was too. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet protesting as they touched the cold floor. Her gaze fell on her shoes, still sitting on the newspaper. The torn one looked even more pathetic in the daylight. With a sigh, she reached for the tube of superglue. A sharp, authoritative knock on the apartment door made her jump. It was too early for mail, and they didn't get visitors. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Was it the landlord about the rent being 2 days late? A debt collector. She pulled on a robe, her heart thumping, and peered through the peephole. A man in an impeccably tailored black suit stood in the dingy hallway. He held a large, elegant-looking shopping bag. He looked completely out of place, like a character from a different movie who had wandered onto the wrong set. Hesitantly, she opened the door, a crack leaving the chain on. "Can I help you?" The man's expression was polite but unreadable. "Miss Elara Vance." "Yes. This is for you." He held out the bag. It was from Valerius, one of the most exclusive high-end department stores in the city, a place she had only ever walked past. "I think you have the wrong person," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't order anything." "There is no mistake, Miss Vance," the man said smoothly. "My instructions were very specific." He placed the bag on the floor in front of her door, gave a slight nod, and turned his polished shoes, clicking on the linoleum as he walked away. Elara stared at the bag, her mind racing. Was it a prank? A mistake, a trick? After a full minute, she slowly unhooked the chain, opened the door, and pulled the bag inside, locking the door securely behind her. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the kitchen table. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was a shoebox. The brand name on the box, Stefano Berruti, meant nothing to her, but the box itself felt expensive, heavy, and solid. She lifted the lid. The smell of rich new leather filled the small kitchen. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was the most beautiful pair of black shoes she had ever seen. They were simple, elegant flats, but the craftsmanship was exquisite. The leather was flawless, the stitching perfect. They were not just shoes. They were a work of art. They were the opposite of the torn, battered things she had worn for years. Her first feeling was not joy, but a profound sense of unease. Who would send her this? Why, there was no note, no card. She thought of the men at the restaurant, the finance bros from last night. A cold dread washed over her. Was this some kind of crude proposition, a rich man's idea of a down payment? The thought made her feel sick. Then she saw it. Tucked into the side of the shoebox was a thick, cream-colored envelope. Her name, Elara Vance, was written on the front in crisp, clean type. Her hands shaking even more, she tore it open. It wasn't a proposition. It was a letter. But it wasn't a personal one. The letterhead was from the Midwest Advanced Lung Institute, a world-renowned private clinic she had only ever read about. Dear Ms. Vance, this letter is to confirm an initial consultation for your brother Leo Vance with Dr. Alistair Finch on Wednesday, September 10th at 9:00 a.m. Following this consultation, Leo has been pre-admitted for a full diagnostic workup and enrollment in a privately funded clinical trial for the new therapeutic drug VX-809 under the direct supervision of Dr. Finch. All costs associated with the consultation treatment travel and a 2-month stay in the adjacent patient family residence have been covered in full by an anonymous benefactor through the Croft Foundation. Please find enclosed the preliminary paperwork. A car service will arrive at your residence at 8:00 a.m. on Wednesday to transport you and your brother to the Institute. Sincerely, Eleanor Bishop, Patient Intake. Coordinator Ilara read the letter once, then twice. The words swam before her eyes. Dr. Alistair Finch, she knew that name. He was a pioneer in cystic fibrosis research, a genius. The VX-809 trial was something she and Dr. Levine had talked about with a sense of hopeless longing. It was the future, a potential game-changer, but it was astronomically expensive and nearly impossible to get into. Anonymous benefactor. The Croft Foundation. The name rang a distant bell. Some tech billionaire. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. She sank into a kitchen chair, the letter clutched in her hand, the luxurious shoes forgotten. This was everything she had been praying for, a miracle delivered to her door. The denial letter from the insurance company was still on the table, a flimsy piece of paper suddenly rendered powerless by this heavyweight champion of a letter. Leo could get the treatment. He could have a chance, a real chance. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to cry last night now streamed down her face, tears of shock, of confusion, but mostly of overwhelming, terrifying hope. "Ellie," Leo's voice, raspy from sleep, cut through her stupor. He stood in the doorway, holding his nebulizer mask, his eyes wide with concern. "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" She looked from her brother's worried face to the letter in her hand, and then to the impossible beautiful shoes in the box. This gift wasn't just about covering her worn-out soles. It was about giving her a path to walk on, a path she thought had been closed off forever. But as the initial shock subsided, a new set of questions began to surface, sharp and unsettling. Who was this anonymous benefactor? Why had they chosen her and Leo? And what, if anything, would they expect in return? The gift had changed everything in an instant. But Ilara had a chilling premonition that the price of this miracle was yet to be revealed. The miracle came with a condition, though it was presented as an opportunity. 2 days after the shoes and the letter arrived, another courier delivered a second envelope. This one bore the logo of Croft Enterprises. Inside was a formal job offer. Position: Junior Administrative Assistant to the Executive Board. Salary a figure that made Ilara's breath catch in her throat. It was more than triple what she earned at the Gilded Sparrow, even on a good week. Benefits: a comprehensive health insurance plan that would cover all of Leo's future needs beyond what the Foundation's grant provided. There was a short, typed note attached. "The Foundation believes in holistic support, Miss Vance. Stability is a key component of successful patient outcomes. We hope you will consider this offer. Your start date would be this coming Monday." Ilara's pride warred violently with her pragmatism. It felt like charity, a gilded cage. They had investigated her, knew her financial desperation. She was being managed. The thought was humiliating. But then she looked at Leo, whose excitement about the clinic was the brightest she'd seen him in years. He was practicing his fancy doctor questions and had already packed a small bag. How could she let her pride stand in the way of his health, of their future? She called the number on the letterhead and accepted the position. Monday morning felt like stepping onto a different planet. Croft Enterprises was housed in a skyscraper that didn't just touch the clouds, it seemed to command them. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass, so quiet she could hear the soft scuff of her new Baruti shoes against the polished floor. The shoes felt alien on her feet, a costume she wasn't sure how to wear. She was met by a woman named Sarah, who had a relentlessly efficient smile and eyes that seemed to catalogue Ilara's second-hand blazer and nervous posture in a single glance. "Welcome to Croft Enterprises, Ilara. You'll be on the 88th floor, the executive level." The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-lurching ascent. When the doors opened, it was to a world of hushed tones, muted greys and panoramic views of the city. It was the view the patrons at the Gilded Sparrow paid hundreds of dollars to look at. Here, it was just the backdrop to another day at the office. Her desk was in an open-plan area with 3 other assistants, all of them dressed in sharp, expensive-looking attire. They gave her polite, curious smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. She was an anomaly, and they all knew it. Her duties were simple for now, managing schedules, booking, travel formatting, reports. It was overwhelming, but she was a fast learner, her years of waitressing having honed her ability to multitask under pressure. She didn't see him until late afternoon. The atmosphere on the floor shifted, almost imperceptibly. A tension, a heightened sense of alertness. Then Julian Croft strode out of his corner office, a sleek glass box that overlooked Lake Michigan. He was taller than she expected, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His face was the same one she'd seen in business magazines, sharp, handsome, but with an unapproachable coldness in his grey eyes. He was talking to a group of executives, his voice low and decisive. He didn't look in her direction. He didn't acknowledge her existence at all. Ilara felt a strange mix of relief and something else. Disappointment. She wasn't sure. This was her mysterious benefactor, the man who had anonymously upended her entire life, and to him she was apparently so insignificant that she didn't even warrant a glance. Perhaps that was for the best, she told herself. She was here to work to earn the stability this job provided for Leo. She would be professional, invisible. She would prove she was more than a charity case. The week passed in a blur of new software, new names, and a new kind of exhaustion. This wasn't the physical ache of a double shift, but a mental fatigue, the strain of constantly being on guard, of trying to fit into a world where she didn't know the rules. On Wednesday, the car service arrived as promised. The ride to the Midwest Advanced Lung Institute was silent. Leo looking out the window with a mixture of fear and awe. The clinic was even more impressive than its name suggested, feeling more like a futuristic spa than a hospital. Dr. Alistair Finch was a kind, brilliant man who spoke to Leo not as a patient, but as a person. He explained the VX-809 trial, the potential it held, the risks involved. For the first time, Ilara felt the suffocating weight on her chest begin to lift. Hope, real and tangible, was no longer a distant dream. She returned to work on Thursday with a renewed sense of purpose. This job, this strange, intimidating world was worth it. Leo's life depended on it. That afternoon, she was tasked with bringing a set of finalized quarterly reports into Julian Croft's office for his signature. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the glass door. She knocked softly. "Enter," his voice commanded. She walked in. The office was vast and minimalist, dominated by the staggering view. He was at his desk, his back to her, looking out at the city. He didn't turn around. "The reports, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. She placed the folder on the edge of his massive mahogany desk. He still didn't turn. "Leave them." She hesitated for a second, then turned to leave. "Miss Vance?" She stopped her hand on the doorknob. He swiveled in his chair to face her. His gaze was intense, analytical. It was the first time he had looked at her directly. She felt pinned like a specimen under a microscope. "How is your brother?" he asked. His tone wasn't warm or caring. It was flat, like he was inquiring about a stock performance. He's good," she stammered, taken aback. "The clinic is amazing. Dr. Finch he's the best." Julian cut her off. "I wouldn't have funded his work otherwise." He looked down at her feet, a brief, almost imperceptible glance at the Beruti shoes. "Are the arrangements satisfactory?" So he was admitting it. The anonymity was a sham, at least between them. A power play. "Yes, everything is more than satisfactory," she said, a hint of defiance creeping into her voice. "Thank you, Mr. Croft. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "You're repaying me by being a competent employee, Miss Vance. That's all the transaction requires." He opened the folder and picked up a pen, his attention already shifted. "You're dismissed." Ilara walked out of the office, her cheeks burning. Transaction. That's all it was to him. A line item in his foundation's budget. She was a problem he had solved with money. The realization should have been crushing, but instead it ignited a spark of anger. She would be the best damn assistant this company had ever seen. She would master this job, excel at it, and prove to him and to herself that she belonged here on her own merit, not because of his cold, calculated charity. But as she sat at her desk, trying to calm her racing heart, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stumbled into a game far more complex than she understood. And across the floor, another man had been watching the entire exchange. Marcus Thorne, a senior vice president with hungry eyes and a predatory smile, leaned back in his chair. He had noticed the new girl, the one who didn't fit. He had seen the way Julian Croft, a man who never noticed his assistants, had looked at her. To a man like Marcus, who saw rivals and weaknesses everywhere, this new unexplained variable was intensely interesting and potentially very useful. The weeks turned into a month, and Ilara fell into a new rhythm. She was a quick study, and her natural organizational skills, honed by years of managing Leo's complex medical schedules and their precarious budget, made her excel at her job. The other assistants, seeing her competence and quiet work ethic, slowly began to accept her. Sarah, her direct supervisor, even started entrusting her with more complex tasks. Ilara was no longer just the charity case. She was becoming a valued member of the team. Her life had bifurcated into two distinct worlds. During the day, she navigated the sterile, high-stakes environment of Croft Enterprises. In the evenings and on weekends, she was at the patient family residence with Leo. The change in him was remarkable. The new treatment was working. His energy levels were up. His coughing subsided, and for the first time in years, there was a healthy color in his cheeks. He was making friends with other kids at the clinic, and his laughter, once a rare and precious sound, now filled their small temporary apartment. This joy was the shield Ilara held against the lingering discomfort of her new life. Her interactions with Julian Croft remained brief and unnervingly formal. He would give her tasks with curt efficiency, his eyes revealing nothing. Yet she started noticing things. He worked later than anyone else, the light in his glass office, often the last one on. He rarely ate, surviving on black coffee and a palpable nervous energy. She saw a profound loneliness in him, a hollowness that all his wealth and power couldn't fill. One evening, she was working late, finalizing a presentation he needed for a meeting in Tokyo the next morning. It was nearly 9 p.m., and the floor was deserted, except for the two of them. She brought the completed file to his office. "It's done, Mr. Croft," she said softly. He was staring at a small silver picture frame on his desk. When he looked up, his guard was down for a fraction of a second. She saw not the ruthless billionaire, but a man drowning in a private sorrow. "Thank you, Elara," he said, using her first name for the first time. The sound of it in his low voice was strangely intimate. He seemed to notice it too, and quickly regained his composure. "Leave it on the desk." She hesitated, her curiosity overriding her usual caution. "Mr. Croft, are you all right?" He gave a short, bitter laugh. "A ridiculous question to ask a man like me. I'm always all right." He looked back at the frame. "Today is my wedding anniversary." The confession hung in the air between them. It was the first crack in his marble facade. "She was beautiful," Elara said, her gaze falling on the picture. It showed a vibrant woman with a dazzling smile, her arm linked with a much younger, happier-looking Julian. "Isabel," he said the name, a raw whisper. She would have liked you." She admired resilience. He seemed to catch himself realizing he had revealed too much. He straightened up the mask of command, snapping back into place. "That's all, Miss Vance. You should go home." Elara left his office, feeling a seismic shift in her perception of him. He wasn't just a cold, calculating benefactor. He was a man shaped by loss, just as she was. His wealth was a fortress, yes, but it was also a tomb. She felt a surprising, unwanted pang of empathy for him. This newfound understanding made their professional interactions subtly different. A quiet respect began to grow between them. He started giving her more substantive work, trusting her with sensitive research and analysis. He was surprised to discover an incisive intelligence beneath her quiet exterior. She could distill complex information and present it with a clarity that many of his senior analysts lacked. The girl who had sacrificed her art school education was still in there, her keen eye for detail now applied to market trends and financial reports. What neither of them knew was that their budding rapport was being closely monitored. Marcus Thorne had made it his business to find out about Elara Vance. He had his own sources, his own ways of digging into people's lives. A few quiet inquiries revealed the story, the struggling waitress, the sick brother, the sudden, miraculous intervention from the Croft Foundation, and the subsequent high-paying job. It was a story that could be spun in many different ways. Marcus's ambition was a ravenous thing. He saw himself as the rightful heir to Croft Enterprises, but Julian, despite his personal grief, remained a formidable and controlling presence. Marcus had been looking for a weakness, a lever to gain more power, and he suspected he had found it in Elara. Why the special interest? Was it a simple case of a billionaire playing savior, or was there something more? Either way, vulnerability was vulnerability. He began his campaign subtly. He would stop by Elara's desk, making friendly small talk, praising her work. He positioned himself as an ally, a friendly face in the corporate shark tank. "It's impressive how quickly you've adapted here," he said one afternoon, leaning against her desk with a charming smile. "Julian doesn't just hire anyone for the 88th floor. You must have really made an impression." Elara offered a polite, non-committal smile. "I'm just trying to work hard." "Of course," Marcus said smoothly. "But you know how it looks to some people. The special treatment, the Foundation's involvement, it sets tongues wagging. People might get the wrong idea about your relationship with Mr. Croft." A cold knot formed in Elara's stomach. "My relationship with Mr. Croft is strictly professional." "I know that," Marcus said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "And you know that. I'm just saying, perception is everything in a place like this. You need to be careful. If you ever need someone to talk to someone who understands the politics of this place, my door is always open." His words were a veiled threat wrapped in a comforting offer. He was planting seeds of doubt, trying to isolate her. He wanted her to see him as a confidant, a position he could later exploit. A few days later, the first real tremor occurred. A reporter from a notorious online financial gossip column called Ilara's desk. "Cassandra Webb from The Gilt Edge," the woman's sharp voice said. "I'm running a story on the philanthropic endeavors of Julian Croft. I was told you might be able to provide a personal perspective on his foundation's charitable work. For instance, how does a waitress with no corporate experience land a prime job at his company headquarters?" Ilara's blood ran cold. "I have no comment," she said, her voice shaking as she hung up the phone. She knew with a sickening certainty who was behind this. The shadows were beginning to move. The quiet, stable world she had so carefully started to build for herself, and Leo was standing on a fault line, and she had just felt the first sign of the earthquake to come. The phone call was just the beginning. The article that appeared on The Gilt Edge 2 days later was a masterpiece of insinuation and veiled accusation. Titled "Croft's Charity Case, Billionaire's Pet Project or Predatory Power Play." It painted a sordid, misleading picture. It detailed Ilara's desperate circumstances, framing her as a pawn in a game played by a reclusive, grief-stricken billionaire. It hinted that her job and Leo's medical treatment were not acts of charity, but tools of control designed to indebt her to him. The article didn't state anything libelous outright, but the implication was poisonous and clear. The moment she read it, the fragile peace of Ilara's new life shattered. The polite smiles from her colleagues turned into furtive glances and hushed whispers. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, judging her, speculating. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that crawled up her neck. Every professional achievement she had worked so hard for over the past 2 months felt erased, replaced by the caricature in the article, the helpless girl, the billionaire's pet. She stormed into Julian's office, clutching her tablet with the article displayed on screen. "Did you see this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. Julian was standing by the window, his jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle jumped in his cheek. He had already seen it. "I did." "This is because of you," she accused, the words tumbling out. "This is what your help does. It doesn't just fix problems, it creates new ones. It puts a spotlight on me, on my family. It turns our lives into gossip. I was a person before I met you, Mr. Croft. A poor person, maybe, but I had my dignity. What do I have now? You have a brother who is getting the best medical care in the world." He shot back, his voice dangerously low. "You have a job that provides you with a future. Do not mistake the malicious actions of my enemies for the intent of my help." "Your enemies!" she cried, laughing bitterly. "I'm the one on the front line here. I'm the one whose name and picture are being dragged through the mud. You're safe up here in your glass tower, but I have to walk through that office and feel everyone's pity and suspicion." "Do you think I wanted this?" he thundered, turning to face her fully, his grey eyes blazing with a fire she'd never seen. "Do you think I enjoy having my personal life, my foundation's work, twisted and dissected by vultures like Marcus Thorne?" "Marcus!" She asked the name, catching her off guard. "You think he's behind this?" "I don't think Miss Vance. I know," Julian said, his voice dropping to a grim tone. "This is his style. He doesn't attack my business directly. He knows I'm too well defended there. So he attacks my character. He finds what he perceives as a vulnerability, and he exploits it. And this time, he's decided that you are my vulnerability." The word hung in the air between them. Vulnerability. The way he said it, filled with frustration and fury, felt like a slap. To him, in this moment of crisis, that's what she was. A liability. A problem to be managed. Before she could respond, his private line buzzed. He snatched it up. "What?" he barked. He listened for a moment, and Ilara watched as every ounce of color drained from his face. His posture went rigid, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. "On what grounds?" "That's impossible. Find a way to fix it, Henderson. Now." He slammed the phone down, his breathing ragged. "What is it?" Ilara whispered, a sense of dread creeping over her. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. "That was my foundation's legal counsel. Marcus isn't just leaking stories to the press. He's made a much more direct move." He took a deep breath as if bracing himself. "He's found an obscure legal loophole. A complaint has been filed with the Medical Ethics Board that oversees the VX-809 trial. The complaint alleges undue influence and potential patient coercion in the selection process for privately funded participants." Ilara stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words. "What does that mean?" "It means," Julian said, his voice hoarse, "that until the board investigates the claim, all privately funded participants are suspended from the trial. It means they've halted Leo's treatments." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. The room tilted the spectacular view of the city, blurring into a meaningless smear of light and color. Halted his treatments. The words echoed in the sudden roaring silence of her mind. Leo had just started to get better. He was finally breathing easier, finally living instead of just surviving. To stop now, it would be catastrophic. This was no longer about gossip columns or corporate politics. This was about her brother's life. Marcus Thorne, in his ruthless quest for power, had targeted an innocent, sick child. Tears of rage and terror streamed down Ilara's face. All the fight went out of her, replaced by a cold, numbing despair that was terrifyingly familiar. It was the same despair she'd felt reading the insurance denial letter, but 1,000 times worse. "This can't be happening," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. Julian took a step toward her, his own anger momentarily forgotten in the face of her raw devastation. "Ilara, I will fix this. I will throw every lawyer, every dollar I have at this." "You don't get it," she sobbed, backing away from him. "You can't just throw money at this. This is what your world does. It takes something good, something pure like a child's chance at life, and it twists it into a weapon. I thought you were helping us, but you just pulled us into your war. Leo is just collateral damage in your fight with Marcus Thorne." She turned and fled his office, her own words echoing in her ears. She ran past the whispering assistants, past the concerned face of Sarah, past the entire world that had promised her a new beginning. All she could think about was Leo and the precious, life-giving medicine that had just been stolen from him. Julian stood alone in his office, the silence ringing in his ears. Her accusation, "Leo is just collateral damage," struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was a chilling echo of his own deepest fear. Years ago, he had been so consumed by a corporate battle that he had missed the first subtle signs of Isabel's illness. By the time she was diagnosed, it was too late. He had vowed never again to let his ambition cause harm to someone he cared about. And now history was repeating itself in the most monstrous way. He had tried to do a good thing, a single uncomplicated act of kindness, but in his arrogance, he had failed to see that in his world, nothing was ever uncomplicated. He had dragged Ilara and her dying brother into his own personal battlefield, and the first casualty had just been declared. Despair was a cold, quiet roommate in the small clinic apartment. For 2 days, Ilara ignored the frantic calls, focusing only on Leo, whose breathing was growing shallower. On the third morning, a knock on the door revealed Julian Croft. He was a wreck suit, rumpled face, etched with sleeplessness and defeat. "My lawyers have failed," he said, his voice raw and stripped of its usual authority. "Marcus has us trapped in a legal maze that will take months to navigate. I was arrogant to think I could fix your life without consequence. I dragged you into my war, and I am so sorry." He looked at her, his usual mask of command gone, revealing the broken man beneath. "I'm not here with a solution. I'm here to ask for your help. You see things differently than we do. You see details we miss." His vulnerability was more disarming than any show of power. Seeing a sliver of hope, Ilara agreed. She closed her eyes, replaying every interaction with Marcus. It was mostly corporate charm and veiled threats, until one trivial memory surfaced. She'd overheard him in a hallway laughing with another man. "Don't worry," Marcus had said. "Old Henderson is too loyal to see the forest for the trees. He still blames himself for the Isabel situation." The phrase hit Julian like a physical blow. Isabel's death. Henderson, my assistant, has always carried a profound guilt for a scheduling decision he made just before she fell ill. Ilara's clue opened a dark new avenue of investigation. Julian unleashed his security team, not on Marcus's corporate dealings, but on his past, specifically around the time of Isabel's death. The truth they uncovered was more monstrous than either could have imagined. Marcus, bitter over Julian's perceived weakness, hadn't just exploited a tragedy, he had caused it. Years ago, he had paid a corrupt lab to create a slow-acting organic toxin. His goal was merely to make Isabel sick enough to sideline Julian during a critical deal. But he never knew she had a tiny dormant cancer. The poison acted as a catastrophic accelerant, turning a treatable condition into a death sentence. Armed with irrefutable proof, Julian didn't need lawyers, he needed the police. Marcus Thorne was arrested for murder. With his conspiracy exposed, the ethics complaint vanished, and Leo's life-saving treatments were immediately reinstated. That evening, Julian found Ilara watching over a sleeping Leo, the soft puff of his nebulizer filling the room. "It's over," Julian said quietly. "You found the key. Your observation did what my entire fortune couldn't. You saved us." She looked up at him, the vast gulf between their worlds finally closed. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, his voice soft with a respect that had been forged in crisis, "we begin again. Not as a benefactor and his project, but as equals. Your position at the company is yours by merit alone. And I hope you'll allow me to get to know the brilliant woman who saved my life, not just my company." Ilara smiled, a true, hopeful smile. The gift hadn't been the shoes or the job. It was the chance to stand on her own, ready to walk a new path together. In the end, this wasn't a story about a rich man saving a poor woman. It was a story about two people broken by their pasts who found a way to heal each other. Ilara's strength was never in her resilience to hardship, but in her unwillingness to surrender her humanity. Julian's redemption came not from his wealth, but when he finally learned to use his power to protect that humanity, instead of just shielding himself from the world. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest changes in our lives don't come from grand gestures, but from the simple act of truly seeing another person, their struggles, their strength, their torn shoes. It reminds us that kindness, when faced with darkness, can become the most powerful weapon of all. What did you think of Ilara and Julian's journey? Do you believe a single act of kindness can truly change everything? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will inspire and touch your heart. Thank you for listening.